Yeah, we'll just take care of it.
All right, back on the record. Minutes present by video conference. We will take up Mr. Johnson's issue.
No, I need Mr. Johnson. They've got 7 lawyers. How long? If they need him as a witness, let them call him now.
He'll help.
Mr. Judge Sparre, with Mr. Economy's representation that there are no circumstances under which he will put Mr. Johnson on the stand, we have no objection to him remaining in the courtroom.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your work. Next witness. Ms. Gilman, can you hear me?
I can, Your Honor.
Can you raise your right hand, please? You swear the testimony about to give this proceedings to be the truth, so help God.
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Gilbert. Could you please state your name and spell it for the court?
My name is Claire Gilbert, C-L-A-R-E, G-I-L-E as in boy, E-R-T.
Where are you employed?
At the Georgia Innocence Project.
Employed by the Georgia Innocence Project. What does Georgia Innocence Project do?
We are an independent, nonprofit organization that works to identify, correct, and prevent cases of wrongful conviction in Georgia and to support people who have been exonerated.
Do clients or prospective clients of the Georgia Innocence Project pay for services?
No, we provide all our services pro bono.
Ms. Gilbert, what is your role at the Georgia Innocence Project?
I am the executive director.
And how long have you had that role?
I have been executive director since June of 2017. Before that, I was interim executive director since May of 2016.
In your current role, could you please describe your duties and responsibilities as the executive director of Georgia Innocence Project?
As executive director, I oversee all aspects of the organization, from litigation and case management to fundraising, policy work, operations, and communication, and working with the board of directors.
One of your duties, Ms. Gilbert, is that to supervise me?
It is.
If you could briefly describe for the court your professional background prior to becoming executive director of GIP.
I am an attorney. I have been working at Georgia Innocence Project in various capacities since 2015. Prior to that, I was a public defender for 6 years. Before that, I worked as a policy lawyer at a nonprofit organization called the Government Accountability Project. We worked with whistleblowers at nuclear weapons facilities. Prior to that, I went to law school, and before that, I was a victims advocate in a prosecutor's office.
So Ms. Gilbert, you are an attorney, and you are also the executive director of Georgia Innocence Project. In which capacity are you testifying today?
In my capacity as executive director, as a representative of the organization.
Ms. Gilbert, when did Dennis Perry first contact Georgia Innocence Project?
I was not here at the time. I've gone back and reviewed the files and time logs and entries, and he first contacted us in 2004.
In 2004, what kind of work did Georgia Innocence Project do for prospective clients?
It was pretty similar to what we do now. The way that we operate is we have 3 main stages. We have an application stage, a screening stage, and a representation stage. People write to us from prison indicating that they are innocent or have been wrongfully convicted, and we undertake a series of steps to determine whether or not They do appear to have been wrongfully convicted and be innocent, and whether there is anything that we can do to assist them.
As part of those steps, do you conduct investigation?
Right, so after the screening stage process, what we do at the initial stage, the application stage, is we review their case or their application against a set of criteria, case acceptance criteria. That criteria includes that the person must be raising a claim of actual or factual innocence in a case where the identity of the perpetrator was at issue at trial, and there must be some form of physical evidence that can be tested in order to, that is relevant to the identity of that perpetrator. Or at least that was the strict model years ago when Mr. Perry first contacted us.
And
After it goes
go ahead.
from the application stage, if it looks like the person has met those initial case acceptance criteria, we move it over to a screening stage. At that time, we essentially reconstruct the case file through a series of Public Records Act requests, and we pull in information from all kinds of different agencies and entities and review that. We try to review all the legal records, we look for evidence, we try to figure out what has happened in the case, if the person is innocent, and if there's a way to prove it. If it appears that this is a case that meets our criteria and that we can do something about it, at that time, if we have the capacity, we'll enter a representation agreement with the person and it would move to a different stage.
At some point, did Georgia Innocence Project enter into a representation agreement with Mr. Perry?
Yes, GIP entered a representation agreement with Mr. Perry in 2014.
And what kind of representation did GIP take on for clients in 2014?
At that time, it's a limited representation, limited to testing physical evidence that had been located for DNA to determine whether the identity of the perpetrator could be discerned from the evidence.
And was that the case with Mr. Perry as well?
That was, yes.
Did GIP in fact file litigation on Mr. Perry's behalf after that litigation agreement was entered into?
You're fading out, but I think you asked if we filed litigation on his behalf after that point, and the answer is yes, we did. In 2015, we filed a motion for post-conviction DNA testing to test the physical evidence that had been located in the case.
And what were the results of that testing generally?
Inconclusive. There was little to no DNA on the evidence, and it was not informative or meaningful results.
And at that point, did Georgia Innocence Project feel that it had exhausted all of its efforts to compare Dennis Perry to the available evidence in the case?
I'm sorry, I did not catch that one.
Did Georgia Innocence Project at that point feel like it had exhausted its efforts to compare Dennis Perry to the available evidence in the case?
I'm going to repeat back what I think you said just to make sure I'm answering the right question.
It's a good
I
idea.
believe that you asked me if at that point Georgia Innocence Project felt that it had exhausted the options in Mr. Perry's case, and that is correct. At that time, we did what we could do with the limits of the technology that was available and the resources that we had at that time. So he would have essentially shifted back into a screening stage at that point to see whether there might be something we could do for him at some point down the road, or find counsel or something.
And what steps did Georgia Innocence Project take at that point?
His case, I believe that he got the results of the post-conviction DNA testing that first round at the middle or end of 2015. We had a staff attorney here on a federal grant at that time who had been working intensely with him in 2014 and 2015. She left the organization at the end of 2015 when the grant ended, and I took over the organization in mid-2016. Once I got up to speed on Mr. Perry's case and other cases, it became clear to me that he was going to need some broad-scale investigation in his case to see if there were any other options or legal avenues available for him, which exceeded GIP's capacity at the time. I was the only attorney on staff. In fact, initially I was the only employee on the staff. And so what I did was function sort of at the executive director level to take some steps to try and get him help and get his case moving. I reached out to a large firm that I felt might have the resources and who had expressed an interest in doing a big death penalty blank case. And this was certainly big enough to meet that criteria. However, after reviewing it for a while, they indicated that it was too much for them. The investigation was going to be too intensive. They chose not to take the case. I worked with a previous attorney to try and pitch the case to a couple of podcasts that might be able to provide investigative support. And eventually, the Undisclosed podcast expressed an interest in taking on and reporting on the case and doing some sweeping investigative work.
So just in case, Ms. Gilbert, for the court, what is Undisclosed and what is a podcast?
A podcast is like a radio program that you can access through the internet. It can be any number of different things. The Undisclosed podcast is produced by a team of 3 attorneys who focus on wrongful conviction or innocence cases, and they attempt to reinvestigate those cases and report on them.
And at or about that time, Ms. Gilbert, did GIP also enter into a new representation agreement with Mr. Perry?
Yes, once it became clear that the Undisclosed podcast was interested in looking into and investigating Mr. Perry's case, it also became very clear to me that he was going to need counsel, representation, who had the resources to oversee and support him during the investigation process by the podcast, and the significant resources that would be necessary to represent him if anything flowed from or was produced by the podcast.
And had GIP's case criteria changed by that point to permit you to engage in a new representation agreement with Mr. Perry?
Well, yes, I mean, it sort of evolved over time. At the time that I entered the representation agreement, or that GIP entered the representation agreement with Mr. Perry in 2018, I believe it was, what the purpose was to provide him representation during the course of the expansive investigation into his case at that time.
And did GIP also pitch this case to another law firm?
Yes. So once the podcast came on board, it became very clear to me that I would have to really ramp up efforts again to get him representation. So with the fact that the podcast was coming on board and would be interested, I approached the law firm of King Spalding and pitched the case to them, and they fortunately agreed to come on board at that time.
Between 2018 and when this EM&T extraordinary motion for new trial was filed, how would you describe, broadly speaking, Georgia Innocence Project's efforts on behalf of Mr. Perry?
Can you just repeat the first part of that question again? I heard the latter part.
Between 2018 and when the extraordinary motion for new trial was filed, how would you describe GIP's efforts on behalf of Mr. Perry in a general, broad way?
Very, very intense. Not only GIP's efforts, the podcast, King Spalding's efforts, intense. and demanding.
Since 2018, has Georgia Innocence Project filed open records requests?
Yes, about 40.
And at some point, Ms. Gilbert, did you learn that the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had also begun investigating Mr. Perry's case?
Yes, I did.
And approximately when was that?
I learned they were investigating their case, I believe, in the spring of 2019.
In December 2019, did you personally get an update from the investigative reporter working on that story?
I did, yes.
And during that update, did you learn information regarding Erik Sparre?
Yes.
In a very broad way, what did you learn about Erik Sparre?
Objection, Your Honor, that's hearsay.
Your Honor, I'm just asking to explain the next steps that we're taking as part of our diligence argument.
I mean, it's hearsay.
It is hearsay. It's sustained objection.
I have no further questions for Ms. Gilbert.
No questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert.
Appreciate your time, and you are excused. Next week.
Thank you.
Your Honor, Mr. Perry would call Joe Gregory, who will appear remotely, and we may take a minute to get him
Sure.
on the phone. Gregory, would you state your full name for the record, please, sir?
Yes, sir. Joe Bancroft Gregory.
And where do you live, Mr. Gregory?
I currently reside in Yakima, Washington.
Were you formerly employed by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
Yes, sir, I was. I retired on disability in 1999.
And prior to retiring on disability in 1999, what was your position with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
I was a special agent assigned to originally the Douglas office and then the Kingsland office when it came into existence.
And when did you begin working with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
That would have been 1984, sir.
And so that means you were there about 15 years before your retirement?
Yes, sir.
And prior to going to work for the GBI, had you ever worked in or served in law enforcement before?
Yes, sir. Starting in 1970, I was employed with the Glenn County Police Department for approximately 2 years. I then joined the Georgia State Patrol, and I was with them until the time that I transferred to the GBI.
In March 1985, what were your title and job responsibilities with the GBI?
I was a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation working out of the Douglas Regional Office, and I was assigned to Glenn County and Camden County, Georgia.
And in your role as being assigned to Glenn County and Camden County, tell us what that meant.
That meant that they were my primary counties to assist when they requested assistance from the Bureau. Of course, the Bureau did have some primary enforcement such as gambling and drugs and a few other things, political corruption, that we did not have to be requested to assist in. But other than that, I was there to assist the county and city law enforcement agencies in those two counties.
So if a law enforcement agency, county law enforcement agency or city law enforcement agency in either Camden or Glenn County requested help from the GBI, you would be assigned to those matters?
Yes, sir. If I was available, I would be the one to respond to their request for help.
Mr. Gregory, were you the GBI investigator assigned to and responsible for investigating the murders of Harold and Thelma Swain?
Yes, sir, I was.
And tell us how you learned about the murders.
On the night of the homicides, I received a telephone call from the Georgia State Patrol Post in Brunswick, stating they were relaying a message from the Camden County Sheriff's Department requesting assistance in a death investigation at the Rising Daughters Baptist Church in Camden County.
And what did you do when you received that call?
I immediately proceeded to the church, and when I arrived, I met with Deputy Butch Kennedy, who was their chief investigator.
And when you say their chief investigator, just so the record is clear, the Camden County Sheriff's Office chief investigator?
Yes, sir. He was chief investigator for the Camden County Sheriff's Office.
And he was already there when you arrived?
Yes, sir. When I arrived, Deputy Kennedy had secured the scene. It was blocked off with crime tape, and there were several officers on the porch and in the church to keep people out of the crime scene.
Okay. And what did you and Mr. Kennedy do upon your arrival?
Initially, Deputy Kennedy took me into the entrance foyer of the church, which was the crime scene. There I observed a black male and a black female, their bodies on the floor. Both appeared to have received apparent bullet wounds. The first thing we did was to photograph the area extensively, looking at the same time looking for anything that might be evidence. And during that photographic time, we found numerous black buttons with black or dark colored thread attached. We found a white button. We found 5 .25 caliber projectiles, and there were 2 pairs of glasses on the floor near the bodies.
So did you later learn the identity of the 2 deceased people that you saw when you arrived?
Yes, sir. The male was Harold Swain, and the female was identified as Thelma Swain.
And as you are photographing the scene there, you saw various pieces of what you considered to be evidence that might be related to the murders?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we did. And prior to removing any of that, Deputy Kennedy assisted me in preparing a crime scene sketch. And by that, I mean we measured and made a sketch where we would be able to place all items back in the exact location in which we found.
All right. And you mentioned that you guys found some buttons. Is that right?
Yes.
Some
That's
shell
right.
casings. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then 2 pairs of glasses on the floor.
Yes, sir.
And what did you guys do with that evidence, Mr. Kennedy, after you documented where it was? Did you take photographs of it?
Yes, sir. It was all photographed, and then it was collected and listed on Georgia Bureau Investigation property receipts, and then placed into envelopes or the cartridges, to the best of my memory, was placed in a empty film cartridge. They were all marked and as evidence and listed on the GBI received property.
Just as you're collecting that evidence, would you just describe for us generally how that was done?
Of course, excuse me, I was wearing gloves, but the bullets were, I had a small pair of tweezers that I carried with me. I inserted those into the cartridges and placed those into, like I said, a film cartridge. The buttons were picked up and the glasses were picked up and placed in an envelope.
How did you pick the glasses up, Mr. Mr. Gregory?
They were picked up with my hand, but I was wearing glasses when they were, wearing gloves when I picked them.
And what did you place the glasses in?
To the best of my remembrance, sir, I placed them in an envelope. I would have to see that I do have a copy if you want me to.
I'll let you take a look at that in just a minute.
Okay.
But what was the purpose for collecting the evidence and securing it? What did you ultimately intend to do with it?
Well, we were based on what Deputy Kennedy said, that some of the people in the church said there had been a scuffle prior to the gunshots, and finding the bullets, the buttons scattered around the vestibule was quite obvious there had been a scuffle, quite violent one. The glasses laying on the floor, one pair, which later was determined to belong to the victim, Harold Swain. The other pair appeared that they probably fell out of the suspect's, the perpetrator's pocket, because they were still in a closed position on the floor, and I believe you have photographs of how we found them. So we felt very strongly that those glasses, the ones that had one lens popped out and laying nearby, probably belonged to the perpetrator.
All right, why don't we
Deputy Kennedy also had asked some of the people in the church, and they said they had never seen the victim wearing anything like that.
You've talked about, I'm sorry, Mr. Gregory, finish, please.
The Deputy Kennedy, prior to my arrival, had asked some people if they recognized the glasses, and nobody in the church recognized those glasses. The ones that I call horn rim glasses, the people recognized as being Harold, and like I said, those were later taken to an optometrist and determined to be Mr. Swain's glasses.
All right, Mr. Gregory.
Also, that vestibule had been cleaned that night prior to the meeting, so we know it was not something that was there prior to the incident.
All right, just so let's clear that out. There was a meeting going on at the church on the night of March 11th, 1985.
Yes, sir, they were having a Bible study.
And you learned as part of your investigation that the vestibule, the area in which the scuffle and murders took place, had been cleaned the day before. I mean, that day?
Yes, sir. Actually, the day of the incident, it had been cleaned.
All right. We're going to put up on the screen a photograph I hope you can see. All right, can you see that photograph?
Yes, sir, I can.
And is that the pair of photograph? Is that a photograph of the pair of glasses you've been describing that you believed belonged to the perpetrator?
Yes, sir, that's the photograph of those glasses.
All right, and what all did you notice that was unusual about those glasses?
Well, they were very thick glasses, tinted, obviously. That even shows in the photograph. They appeared to have been made from several pairs of glasses. The left and the right earpieces, as I call them, did not match, and the left earpiece, as you can actually see in this photograph, had been repaired with tape. there was some heating, that you could see with the naked eye on the glasses also.
Your Honor, we'd like to move for admission of the photograph as Exhibit 5.
Gentlemen,
No objection.
so do without objection.
Mr. Gregory, I'm going to show you another document that we're going to have put up on the screen. And while they're getting that ready to put up on the screen, did you record, you've told us you took photographs, did you record your observations there at the scene any other way?
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't understand your question.
I'm sorry, I moved back away from the microphone. You indicated that you made photographs to document the scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you told us you took measurements.
Yes, sir.
And did you use those photographs and measurements ultimately to create a scene diagram?
Yes, sir. That was also made using notes that was taken at the time Deputy Kennedy and I were collecting evidence and making those measurements. We took notes, and then later I prepared the crime scene sketch.
All right, would you take a look at the document on the screen? And I guess we can only put the first page up there to start with, but would you look it over and see if it's a document you recognize or have seen before?
Yes, sir. That is my investigative summary for the actions I took when I met Deputy Kennedy there that night.
And if we look over at page 2 of that document, it'll take just a minute. All right, if we look down there, the last sentence there on the first, at the end of the first full paragraph. That one
Okay.
also observed.
Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
No, but that's the wrong sentence.
Yeah.
But this sentence, last sentence of the first paragraph. Here we go. All right, can you see that?
Yes, sir.
And so in your report, you documented the items that you had found and collected there at the scene, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and now if we'll flip over to page 4 of that document, I'm going to ask you if that's the scene diagram you prepared.
Yes, sir. That is noted on the right hand about middle ways it up, and I prepared that document.
All right, and will you just generally describe for us, it depicts Mr. and Mrs. Swain, is that right?
I'm sorry, Ms. Todd, I can't really hear you.
Why don't you
I can
just,
see you, but I can't understand you.
all right. A lot of people have that problem. Just describe for us generally, does this diagram show the location of the bodies as you observed them that night at the church?
Yes, sir. Numerous measurements were made to the center of the head, the belly button, to the hands, to the feet, where we would be able, if necessary, to lay somebody down and put them back in the exact position that we found Mr. and Ms. Swain that night. All these measurements were made with steel tape, so there wouldn't be any stretching or shrinking of the tape, as they say. So it was done as we were trained to do it, and each item was carefully measured and documented.
And can you tell us, Mr. Gregory, what item F is on that diagram, please, sir?
On top of what, sir?
Item F. Can you see it?
Item F.
It's right there in the center.
Brown plastic frame glasses, and in the initials it has H. Swain. Those were what I described as horn rim glasses that people who knew Mr. Swain had identified those as being his.
Okay, and then also on that diagram, down toward the left-hand side of it, is there another pair of glasses depicted?
Yes, sir. Designated item G as in George. Yes, sir. Those are what we believe were the suspects, perpetrators' glasses.
And at the time you prepared this diagram, you even labeled it to show that
Yes,
you
sir.
believe that to be the suspect's glasses. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Your Honor, we would like to introduce this document as Exhibit 6.
Any objection?
That would be Defense Exhibit 6, correct?
Yes, sir.
No objection, Judge.
No objection.
And before we leave the diagram, Mr. Gregory, items H through L on your diagram, what were those?
Those were 25 caliber casings, CCI blazer, brass casings.
All right. And how about items A through E? What were those as depicted on your diagram?
Those were the dark blue buttons with dark blue thread and our cloth attached to them that we found throughout the investigation.
All right, and does Exhibit 6 accurately reflect the notes you made following your investigation that night? Or the
Yes,
report
sir.
the report you filed?
Yes, sir.
You talked about the unusual pair of glasses that you found that you believed likely belonged to the suspect. Did you at any point in time have those glasses examined by anyone?
Yes, sir. We took, or I took both pairs to an optometrist in Brunswick and had him look at those, and he confirmed that the horn rim glasses were in fact Harold Swain's prescription. The others, he was quite in depth as far as manufacturer. He said that the lenses were pitted, and I think he thought probably a mechanic. There were safety type glasses. He gave us the size of those glasses and the manufacturer, and he gave me a list of the nationwide distributors of those glasses. He also read the prescription of those suspect lenses. To the best of my knowledge, he said the suspect would be farsighted and had a stigma in, I believe, the right eye.
And astigmatism in one eye?
Yes.
All right. And as part of your investigation, did you document the information provided to you by the optometrist?
Yes, sir, I did. I prepared a investigative report and it was placed in the case file.
All right. We're going to put up on the screen a document, and I'll ask you if that's the case report that you prepared.
Dr. Tillman, correct. That is my investigative report. Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's look over at page 2 of that report. And it indicates, it mentions the pitted areas you were talking about. Do you see that there?
Yes, sir.
And those were on the outer surface of the lenses?
Yes, sir.
And,
Small picnic area on the outer surface of the lenses, yes, sir.
and did the optometrist offer any conclusion about what those pitted areas may indicate?
Yes.
And
Yes, sir.
what did he indicate?
He said that the subject is possibly a mechanic or a welder.
All right, did you guys ultimately also, oh, I'm sorry, before I forget, Your Honor, we'd like to offer Mr. Gregory's report as Defendant's Exhibit 7.
No objection, Executive.
Mr. Gregory, did you and Mr. Kennedy also send the items that you collected to the GBI crime lab for investigation?
Yes, sir, we forwarded them on to the state crime lab for further examination.
Okay. And you forwarded not just the glasses, but also the shell casings, the buttons, and everything else you had collected at the
Yes, sir,
scene?
all items that were, other than the film, those were developed and printed locally. All items collected as evidence at the crime scene were forwarded on to the crime lab for examination.
All right, and did you receive an official report back from the crime lab documenting what they had found in their examination of the glasses?
Yes, sir, I did.
And we're going to put up on the screen for you a document that's dated June 25th, 1985. Is that a document you have seen before?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is that the official report that you and Mr. Kennedy got back from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation crime lab?
Yes, sir. It was, and it was marked and made a permanent part of the case report.
Your Honor, we'd like to move for admission of that document as Defendant's Exhibit 8.
Judge, if you'll give me just a minute, please. Sure. Thank you. No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. It's a good objection.
The defense aid.
All right, if we'll look over at page 4 of that document, Mr. Gregory. About a little over halfway down, there are 2 paragraphs. It starts microscopic examination of the glasses. I'd like to call your attention to those. Please, sir.
Yes, sir. After microscopic examination of the glasses, it revealed the tempered photographic glass to have bits of adhered metal goblets indicative of welding or a cutting torch, and there was much embedded grease and apparent waterless hand cleaner on the tape that was on the lift-eye frame. And removal of the tape, they revealed apparent hydraulic fluid may transmitted in 2 Caucasian hairs, one light brown and one blonde, that may have been razor cut.
Did that analysis done by the Georgia Crime Lab confirm, GBI crime lab confirm the earlier conclusion you had reached that these glasses likely belong to the suspect?
Yes, sir, because there was no tie between these glasses and the victim. So again, this just further strengthen our belief that these glasses belong to the perpetrator.
Now, those hairs that were collected and found on the tape in the glasses,
Yes,
did you guys have those analyzed for DNA at that time in 1985?
no, sir. The bureau did the GBI did not have the capability of conducting DNA at that time. It was still fairly new, and what DNA was done by the bureau had to be sent out to a private lab to be done.
And as we sit here today, do you know if it was even possible to do mitochondrial DNA analysis of hairs back in 1985?
Mr. Holliday, to the best of my knowledge, I do not think it was. I think at that, excuse me for adding, but I think at that time, you had to have blood samples, tissue, saliva, something of that nature to do a really in-depth DNA, what they called in-depth at that time.
Mr. Gregory, you may or may not know, but do you know if DNA analysis was eventually done on the hairs that were found on that pair of glasses?
I've been told, sir, that at a later date it was done.
You weren't personally involved in that.
No, sir.
And as I recall, you testified at Dennis Perry's trial, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
Do you know if the glasses themselves were available at the time of trial?
No, sir, the glasses had been inadvertently sent by the sheriff of Camden County at that time to California to be used in an unsolved mysteries episode, and they apparently were lost.
Mr. Gregory, do you recall anything else that you and Mr. Kennedy did, or Deputy Kennedy did, in terms of your analysis or investigation as it relates to the pair of glasses that were found in close proximity to the bodies that you believe belonged to the suspect?
In an attempt to maybe get a list of possible suspects, we listed an article in numerous magazines that were aimed at optometrists and eye doctors and dealers, offering a reward for anybody that could match that prescription, but we never had any response from that.
Thank you. Now, I know you told us earlier there was a Bible study that was going on at Rising Daughter Baptist Church on the night of the murders. Did you or Mr. Kennedy ever interview or talk with any of the people who were present at that Bible study?
It was quite lengthy, the time that Deputy Kennedy and I spent on processing the crime scene. It was finally determined, now Butch, I believe, Deputy Kennedy, I believe, had talked to some of the ladies. The following day, the agent in charge, Douglas, sent 3 other agents over to assist me. They conducted some interviews with the witnesses. I did talk to one witness myself. I believe you probably have that in the file. It was a lady that was sitting inside the church and heard the scuffle. She's the one that told us that Ms. Williams got up to leave.
All right, and when you say Miss Williams, was that Vanzola Williams?
Vanzola Williams, who we have always felt was the best witness in this case.
And why did you think she was the best witness in the case?
Judge, I'm going to
Gregory.
object at this point. That's just a self-serving declaration. It means nothing in this case, and he can't make a decision now as to who the best witness was. That was for a jury in 2003.
Just rephrase your question. Counsel.
As part of your investigation with Deputy Kennedy, Mr. Gregory, did you come to learn that one of the women who had been at the meeting had actually talked to the perpetrator?
Yes, sir.
And which witness or which lady at the church was that?
Vanzola Williams carried on. She was the church member who encountered the suspect in the vestibule, carried on a conversation with him. She then re-entered the church, approached Harold Swain, told him that someone was in the vestibule that wanted to talk to him, and she encountered him a second time on her way out of the church in the vestibule again.
And did you identify any other women who were at the church that night or people who were at the church that night who encountered the suspect twice other than Miss Williams?
No one encountered him face to face other than Vanzola Williams. A couple of the ladies were sitting very close to the southern, there was two doors off the vestibule going into the sanctuary. The suspect stepped into the sanctuary, almost stepped in very closely at the southernmost door, and these two women were sitting close by and got a fairly good look at it.
And did you and Mr. Kennedy and others ever work with the women who had been at the church that night to put together any sort of sketch of the suspect?
Yes, sir. A few days later, we contacted the Jacksonville, Florida Sheriff's Department, who had a very good sketch artist who had worked with them for many years. We made arrangements for her to come to the sheriff's office and work with the ladies. She worked with them for several hours. Each made an individual. She worked with each one who had a good look at the suspect. She worked with them. They each made their own sketch. Then she worked with them collectively, and they ultimately agreed on the final sketch that we used for many years in this case.
And how did you use that composite sketch, Mr. Gregory?
We disseminated it to police departments throughout Florida and Georgia, and once this program appeared, or the case appeared on the Unsolved Mysteries, we were getting leads from all over the United States. We were sending copies of that sketch all over the United States to departments for them to show people who thought they had leads.
That's the second time now that you've mentioned Unsolved Mysteries. At some point, the Swain murders was featured on Unsolved Mysteries?
Yes, sir. The Sheriff Smith made contact with the Unsolved Mysteries people and made arrangements to have this case put on their program.
Now, there was a local hotline set up following these murders, is that right?
Yes, sir. Sir, there was a hotline there at the sheriff's office for anybody who had leads.
All right, and in addition to that, once the murders were featured on Unsolved Mysteries, do they also have a tip line that can be called?
Yes, sir, definitely. They had, if you ever saw a segment of the show, they had numerous operators that would take tips, and there was a number that they could call anytime. They did not have to call real soon after the program. They could call days after.
Now, over the years, Mr. Gregory, how many tips did you and Mr. Kennedy, Deputy Kennedy, investigate?
The top of that, I never counted them, sir, but I would estimate close to 2,000.
All right. And I take it the level of investigation for those varied greatly.
I'm sorry, sir.
The level of investigation you did on each of those tips varied, is that fair?
Yes, sir. A lot of them we could eliminate immediately because the show went into reruns, and for years the show would air 2-3 times, and again we would be flooded with tips. A lot of these cases we could look at the age of the person they were talking about, and you subtract the years to the incident, and these people would have been 12, 13 years old at the time of the incident. So it was very quick to eliminate a lot of them.
Now, as part of your investigation, did you and Deputy Kennedy ever investigate Dennis Perry for the murders of Harold and Thelma Swain?
Dennis, I don't know if he came in through Unsolved Mysteries or if it was on the hotline, but his name came across our desk, and I took it upon myself to find out what I could about Mr. Perry and to see what he was doing on the date of the crime. The first thing I did was contact the analyst in EBI headquarters and request a driver's license photograph of Mr. Perry. That was placed in the standard 6-person GBI photo lineup along with 5 other people who resembled Mr. Perry and or the composite, and that was shown to one of the witnesses to see if they could identify him.
And which witness was it shown to, Mr. Gregory?
Benzel Williams.
And do you remember if you showed it to any other witnesses?
Mr. Holiday, I'm not sure, very possibly, but Kennedy could have shown it to other people. Personally, I've only shown it to Benzel.
All right. And did Miss Williams pick out Dennis
Excuse me,
Perry?
Your Honor, I object. I know where he's going. This would be hearsay as to what she said or didn't say.
Your Honor, I think it goes to an identification by the witness in his presence.
I mean, I read the transcript.
It's in the trial
It's
transcript.
in the trial transcript.
Yes, it is, and it's not necessary, and none of this is.
Overruled.
All right. Mr. Gregory, you can answer the question.
I'm sorry?
Yes. I'll ask the question again. I will. Did Miss Williams pick out and identify Mr. Perry as the perpetrator that she saw at the church that night?
She could not identify anyone in the lineup.
So she did not pick out Mr. Perry.
No, sir, she did not.
What else did you do to investigate Dennis Perry?
Through talking with some of the employees at the Camden County Sheriff's Office, located the home of Dennis Perry's grandparents who lived in the Spring Bluff area. I contacted them. They told me that they had not seen Dennis
Judge, I'm going
And
to
I
object.
recall in a meeting there at the time of the concept.
I'm
Hold
going
on
to,
1 second, sir.
I'm going to object to that. I don't remember any of this coming out of the trial of this case. And as far as Joe Gregory's testimony. So I object on the hearsay.
This is what his parents or parents told him.
This is what he interviewed the grandparents. Yes, sir, of Mr. Perry, who lived in the area.
So that would be hearsay. Sustained objection.
Your Honor, can I be heard a minute on that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, sir.
And I don't know if there's a way for us to be heard without the witness hearing it, because I don't want the witness to be influenced by anything we say.
Sure there is, but I'm afraid for Bob, do you mind? Is that my case? Jump, control the my case. He cannot hear us. Okay. Mr. Gregory, can you hear us? Okay.
Your Honor, Mr. Gregory testified at his trial at the trial, that he placed the materials he gathered and what he prepared in investigating Mr. Perry in what he called a cleared file. And it was a set of boxes that he left behind that he says were still there and were missing by the time of trial and not been seen since. There would have been records recording all of this that could have been used to establish this facts. But those records no longer exist. And so we think the only way to get to the evidence, and we think there's a necessity to allow him to testify. It's a police officer, the GBI agent, testifying about the course of this investigation. He's been consistent about his testimony over the years, and it's going to explain why he took the investigative steps he did, because the information communicated related to where Mr. Perry was at the time and his efforts to verify where Mr. Perry was
I
at
do
the time.
recall that
And that is in the record,
in the
yes.
record.
This is just how he got there, how he figured out where to go to get there.
And all the defense counsel needs to do is say, after talking with the grandparents, what did you do? I went and did this, this, and this. It's all that has to happen here. What the grandparents said or didn't say is irrelevant. And this
I
idea.
agree with Mr. Johnson, after that conversation with grandparents, what you did.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Get him back on here. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, step it across the phone.
All right, Mr. Gregory, can you hear us?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Gregory, after you talked to Dennis Perry's grandparents, what did you do next as part of your investigation?
I contacted Mr. Perry's mother in Jonesboro, Georgia, to obtain where Mr. Perry had been working at the time of the homicides. I then contacted that company, was put in touch with the foreman that Mr. Perry was working for. The foreman checked his logbooks. I ascertained that Dennis Perry was working until after 5:30, 5:45 p.m. the night of the shooting. And then after getting off from work, he had returned to his mother's home in Jonesboro. For him to drive from Jonesboro, Georgia.
Objection, Your Honor, that
From
again,
Georgia.
that's a self-serving declaration in here. There's no evidence to support that, and no testimony about that. That's Judge Gregory's assumptions about whatever. And he can testify to facts, but not to that assumption.
Well, Your Honor, I think it is a fact, but I think it's also in the trial testimony and the transcript.
Overruled, go ahead.
You may finish your answer, Mr. Gregory.
For Mr. Perry to have driven from Jonesboro, Georgia to Spring Bluff back on those dates when the interstate was under construction, today, would say it takes 4.5 hours. You could have easily added an hour to that drive time. It would have been virtually impossible for Mr. Perry to have driven from Jonesboro, Georgia to Rising Daughters Baptist Church and had been there at the time of the shooting.
As a result of your and Mr. Kennedy, Deputy Kennedy's investigation of Dennis Perry, what action did you take?
Well, we know he didn't wear glasses. I really don't know what to say other than that. We, in my opinion, we have cleared Mr. Perry. All the information, investigative notes, lineup were placed into the cleared box, and we moved on to other suspects.
And when you say you placed him in the cleared box, what did that mean as part of your investigation?
The case file was already almost 3 volumes thick. We only left suspects that we considered that were prime suspects and very close to being prime suspects. Their information was placed into the file. If they were cleared, if we felt like we had cleared Mr. Perry, all the notes, the lineup, because we couldn't use the lineup again, or the people that were in it. So it was placed in its entirety into the file, main file box, and ultimately we had 4 of them full of cleared suspects, and we moved on to other investigative leads.
In the course of your investigation, did you ever discover any physical evidence indicating that Mr. Perry was at Rising Daughter on March 11, 1985?
No, sir, we did not.
In the course of your investigation, did you discover any evidence that caused you to believe that Mr. Perry killed Harold and Thelma Swain?
No, sir, we did not.
Did you believe when you testified at his trial, Mr. Perry killed Harold and Thelma Swain?
No, sir, I did not.
Do you believe today that Mr. Perry killed Harold
All
and
object
Thelma
to that
Swain?
question, Judge, is irrelevant.
I do not.
Judge? Well, then I ask that it be stricken from the record in this case. I'm sorry.
Overruled, overruled, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Was that so ruled or overruled, Judge?
You interpreted it, Mr. Johnson.
I did not hear it. I heard the last part. I'm sorry, sir. I just want to know.
Overruled.
Thank you. Mr. Gregory, as part of the investigation you and Deputy Kennedy did you ever have cause to investigate someone named Erik Sparre in connection with the murders of Harold and Thelma Swain?
Yes, sir. Almost a year to the date after the murders, Deputy Kennedy had developed leads based on, I believe, a phone call with some information pertaining to Mr. Sparre, and he had contacted Mr. Sparre's ex-wife. He then contacted me, and the evidence was strong enough that we called and made an appointment with District Attorney John Johnson. We met him in his office in Brunswick, Georgia, and Mickey Melton and one other Glenn County officer was present at that meeting. Mr. Johnson felt that we had enough evidence and suggested that we obtain a search warrant. We went to Mr. Perryfield's office and Deputy Kennedy obtained a search warrant for the Terrence residence of Mr. Sparre where he was living at that time.
And did you attend that search?
Yes, sir, I did. It was myself, Deputy Kennedy, Assistant District Attorney John Johnson, Assistant District Attorney Robert Crowe, and one other DA who I don't remember his name, and the two Lynn County officers.
Mr. Gregory, if you'll be patient, we're going to put a document on the screen. And it looks like it's dated March 11, 1986. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir, that's my investigative report of where we met with Mr. Johnson.
And is that the meeting that you just verbally described for us?
Yes, sir, it is.
And it looks like there are some materials attached to that memo.
I left out a couple of people. I forgot that Lears was also there.
All right. All right, there's some documents attached to your memo. And by the way, did you prepare this memo to document your investigation?
I don't see the documents. Can I see them?
He's going to flash them up on the screen. It just takes a minute to slide from page to page. All right, this appears to be photographs of Erik Sparre.
Yes, sir. I did not take that photograph. That was obtained from police files.
All right. And what's the next document attached to the memo? And do you recognize, Mr. Gregory, that being a modification of the composite sketch that had been prepared?
Yes, sir.
And had the sketch...
I did not prepare it, but I do recall the modification being made.
Skip over.
Ooh, that was a little quick for me.
No, that's okay. We're trying to get to this page. So
Okay.
this appears to be the search warrant affidavit that was prepared by Butch Kennedy that you attached to your report.
Yes, sir.
And do you see, let's look at the first paragraph of that report, of that search warrant. I'm sorry, search warrant affidavit.
March 8, 86, Emily Sparre, the ex-wife of Erik Sparre, told us, yes, sir, she was married to Erik Sparre and lived with him until he moved out. Sometimes March 22nd, 85, sometime on Friday, March 9th, 85, until March 15th, 85, Erik Sparre left home in the morning wearing dark clothing, dark maroon top, early the next morning, he came back wearing only a white t-shirt. He also has and wears a pair of men's lizard skin boots.
And what was, well, the date of the murders was March 11, 1985? Is that correct?
The boot, you mean, sir?
The date of the murders was March 11, 1985,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Sir, that's correct.
So in light of the date of the murders, what was it that was significant to your investigation about this description?
Well, from having talked with Deputy Kennedy prior to this meeting with Mr. Johnson, the wife had made statements that Erik Sparre had told her he killed well, I'm not going to use the words he did, but he had killed the Swain. And the significance I see there is the fact that he was wearing dark clothing, but she thought it was dark maroon. The boots, the ladies in the church had made, especially Vanzola Williams, had made a remark about the distinctive boots the person was wearing that she met in the vestibule, but that did not come up until later in the investigation when she was viewing a live lineup of some other suspects.
And Ms. Williams, again, was the witness who encountered the perpetrator not once but twice in the vestibule. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Let's look at the next paragraph.
You want me to read this, sir?
Just read it, and you can read it and just tell me what was significant about what's included in this paragraph to your investigation.
Yes, sir, that was very significant, especially based on the pair of glasses we found at the murder scene.
And as I recall earlier, your testimony was that pair of glasses looked like it had been made from several other pair of glasses, correct?
Yes, sir. The two earpieces did not match the frame.
And then let's flip down.
They did not match each other either, so they had been made from three pairs of glasses.
All right, and then let's look at the paragraph that shows on being shown several pairs. Can you read that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I found out later that Deputy Kennedy had basically presented like a show-up with three pairs of glasses, and she picked out the pair found at the scene.
Your Honor, we'd like to ask to move this document into the record as Exhibit 9 of the defendant.
Mr. Johnson?
No objection, Your Honor.
Defense 9 submitted by objection.
Mr. Gregory, do you know if Emily Head is still alive today?
If who is still alive, sir?
If Emily Head, Erik Sparre's ex-wife, is still alive today?
No, sir. It's my understanding that she was the victim of a homicide some years ago.
All right, Mr. Gregory, we put another document on the screen I'd like you to take a look at. Take a look at that one, please, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is this a document that you prepared as part of your investigation of the murders of Harold and Thelma Swain?
Yes, sir. This document was based on a telephone conversation that I had with Deputy Kennedy.
And did you document in this memo what Deputy Kennedy shared with you about his investigation related to Erik Sparre?
Yes, sir.
And let's take a look.
Judge, at this time, I'm going to object on the hearsay grounds. None of this, of course, was presented by defense counsel at trial. It was available to him, but none of it was presented. Therefore, anything having to do with this particular document would be hearsay as to what other people said, or what other people said other people said, and so I object on those grounds.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Okay, he's making a hearsay objection.
Can I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Two things. The only thing I'm going to ask him about in this particular document is a recording,
A recording?
a recorded phone call
Okay.
that was heard and documented.
Well, if it has to do with what was said on that phone call, then again, that falls within my hearsay objection.
Is this part of items that are missing?
Your Honor, this particular item apparently still exists in the GBI-5. What I'm not able to address is...
No, this recording is missing.
No, I'm sorry. The recording is missing that I want to ask him about.
Okay.
The document we got pursuant to an open records request. What I can't respond to is whether or not this was in fact available to defense counsel at the time of the trial.
But you want to ask him about what's on the, what he heard on the recording?
I want to ask what was heard on the recording, yes.
Overruled, I'll give you the appropriate way. Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Gregory,
Yes, sir.
you can start reading where it says on Friday night, March the 7th. Do you see that? It's the top line.
I see where she moved out on Friday.
Can you look at the screen?
Oh, okay, sometime, March, yes, sir. I see that.
Do you see on Friday night, March 7th?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then would you just read that into the record, please, sir?
You're referring to the sentence that begins sometimes on March 9, 1986?
No. If you'll look at the screen, Mr. Gregory, there's a blow up on the
On
screen.
Friday, March 7th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. On Friday, March 7th, 1986, the family was able to record one of these calls. The family is that of Frank Head. They live Route 2, Box 52, Waverly, Georgia. Their daughter, Emily, is the ex-wife of Erik Sparre. On the taped conversation, Erik Sparre stated, excuse my language, Your Honor,
And
I'm
don't,
the motherfucker that killed the two niggers in that church, and I'm going to kill you and the whole damn family if I have to do it in church. After hearing the tape,
that you can stop right there.
I just want to be clear, did he hear the tape?
Mr. Gregory, you ultimately heard the tape, correct?
no, sir, I never heard the tape. This information was given to me by Deputy Kennedy.
All right. Thank you.
I do again renew my my objection to that, that there's been no authentication of it.
It serves no value.
Thank you, sir. Well,
Your Honor, I'd still like to move, if I could,
Yes.
that report in as Exhibit 10.
For the record, I will allow it to be admitted. You objecting to the...
I object, Your Honor, if that's simply to remain in the rest of the court, fine. But I object as far as evidentiary value in this case.
Understand what way I'd give it. It's admitted over objection. That's number 10, I believe.
Mr. Gregory, after the search at Mr. Sparre's parents' house, did you continue your investigation of Mr. Sparre?
Yes, sir. I was given the information that Erik Sparre was working the night of the homicides, that he worked at a local Winn-Dixie there. I refer to it as the mall there in Brunswick. I attempted that night after the search warrant to verify that information. The young lady working in the office part of that store told me that the manager was not there. And I told her what information I was looking for. She stated that the manager would have to get that from their headquarters in Jacksonville, Florida. I gave her one of my cards and asked if she would have the manager call me about verifying that information. And I told her who I was trying to verify. And she took the card and I left the store.
And did anybody ever follow up with you after you left your car?
Several days later, I received a telephone call from a man purporting to be the manager of that store. I again told him what information I needed and why I needed it. And he said he would check and get back with me. Approximately 2 weeks later, maybe 2 weeks rings a bell, Your Honor. 2 weeks later, I received a telephone call again from the man purporting to be the manager at Winn-Dixie. He says that they had checked. His records indicated that Erik Sparre was working the night shift, was at work, and that he had even checked with another employee that was working that night who stated that Erik Sparre was in that store. That was written up on a DBI investigative report and placed in the record.
I'm going to show that to you, Mr. Gregory, because I believe we have it, and ask you if that's the memo you're referring to. Take a look at it.
Yes, sir. Yes, that was the second conversation.
All right. And is that a memo that you prepared as part of your official investigation of the Swain murders?
Yes, sir, it was. It was placed in the case report.
Did you ever speak to the person who identified themselves as Donald A. Mobley again?
No, sir, I did not.
Your Honor, we'd like to move an unredacted version of that report as defendant's exhibit number 11. And I will explain it's unredacted because I believe as the next witness will testify that identifying information is not accurate.
Any objection to 11?
No, Your Honor, I don't object to it at all.
Did that, did you?
Mr. Gregory, thank you for your time. That's all the questions I have right now. Mr. Johnson or Mr. Economy may have some for you.
Mr. Johnson?
Agent Gregory, you go back to the search warrant of Erik Sparre's parents' house. That's where he was living at the time, is that correct?
Mr. Johnson, didn't understand the second half of your question.
Is that microphone on, or is it you?
That's maybe me, Judge.
Judge, yours works great. Theirs doesn't work very well.
All right, just a second, we're gonna try to figure this out.
Let me make sure. Agent Gregory, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Use the mouse.
To do what?
Just move it.
Wait, hang on,
And you're on mute, so if you click the left red.
let me see if it's
It
you.
is.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes, sir. I can hear you.
All right, thank you. When the search warrant was executed, I want to go to there. What were you looking for at that point? You remember?
At the house, Mr. Johnson, what
Yes.
were we looking for
Yes, sir.
on the search warrant?
Yes, sir.
We were looking for CCI laser ammunition. There was one other type of shell, I believe, that was later proved to be involved in it. We were looking for ammunition, 25 caliber ammunition, possibly a gun, possibly a blue shirt with buttons ripped off of it. And to my knowledge, we found absolutely nothing except a small amount of marijuana that was turned over to Deputy Mickey Miller.
You were looking for lizard skin boots, were you not?
I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, your mouth.
You were looking for lizard skin boots, were you not?
Yes, sir, they were very distinctive boots.
Did you find them?
No, sir. We found nothing that was on that search warrant.
You were looking for glasses that might belong to Erik Sparre. At that time, did you find those?
No, sir.
Now, just to make sure, all of these reports that have been shown to you by the defense, you created those in 1985 and 1986. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And as a result of one of the court proceedings, the GBI was ordered to give a copy of your file, the GBI file, to the defense prior to trial, was it not?
Mr. Johnson, I could not understand that. You've got kind of a little echo effect.
Prior to trial, did a Superior Court judge order that the GBI file be given to the defense in this case?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry?
I understood your question correct. You're asking me if the GBI provided the defense with a copy of the case
Yes, sir.
file.
Yes, sir.
Is it? Yes, sir. To my knowledge, I was retired at that time, sir.
And all of these items were or should have been in that file, correct?
Mr. Johnson, I can tell you for a fact that file had been raffled. There was a lot of.
I didn't ask you that question. I asked you specifically.
Your Honor, I'd like the witness to be able to finish his answer.
Well, it's going to be non-responsive to the question.
So he can respond to Mr. Johnson's answer, and then if he wants to explain his answer further, he may, but he does need to initially respond to Mr. Johnson's question.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Johnson's question
Agent.
was a file provided to the defense, correct, Your Honor?
You've answered that question. by saying yes. Now, the question I asked you was, the documents that you have been shown, were they or should they have been in that file?
That's correct. The documents I have been shown should have been in the case file, Your Honor.
If I may, Judge, I don't know how I need to, how I can go about showing this. Is there a mechanical way to do that?
We can help you if you want to.
I'll take all the help an old man without this experience can do.
If you can show us which document, we can probably pull it up for you.
It's,
Is that the, let me make
It's
sure.
number 11, the last one we put out.
Let me make sure. Yes.
It's up. It's up.
No.
No, that's not it. Nope, that's not it either.
All right, sir, I have a copy.
Hold on, now apparently that's not what they're talking about.
All right.
Can he see this from here?
Put it up there, John, so you can see it. I don't know if you see it.
I can tell that it appears to be from a case file, John, but excuse me, Mr. Johnson, I can't read that.
I need to put this on the screen, Bill. This one.
Is that the correct one?
Yes, that is the correct one. Can you read that to yourself, Agent Gregory?
There we go. March 13th, special conduct. Yes, sir, I see that.
That says you contacted Donald Mobley at the Winn-Dixie store in Lanier Plaza and asked him the
Yes, sir.
information. Is that correct?
That was very poor report
I'm
right
not
on my
asking
part.
you-
It was done via telephone.
I'm not asking you if it was poor or not,
Possibly at the Winn-Dixie store in Brunswick Plaza.
but in 1986, on March 13th, or shortly thereafter, that is the document you wrote, that you contacted Donald Mobley at the Winn-Dixie store in Lanier Plaza. Is that a correct statement of what you wrote?
I did contact Mr. Mobley by telephone, who was at the Winn-Dixie store in the Lanier Plaza. That's what I was told he was.
Well, are you saying that that particular summary that you wrote up a summary on talking to some other person before you contacted Donald Mobley?
At that time, Mr. Johnson, I did not know that I was not talking with Mr. Mobley, and this was all done via telephone. I never saw Mr. Mobley. I would not know him if he walked into the room right now. This was all done via telephone.
But nevertheless, nevertheless, it says you contacted Donald Mobley at the Winn-Dixie store in Lanier Plaza, and you requested information about Erik Sparre's employment, and
Correct.
Mr. Mobley, or whoever this was, Mr. Mobley, you write, told you he would have to contact Jacksonville. That's where that information would be. That was on March 13th, correct?
Yes.
That's what you did, what your summary says, doesn't it?
I'm sorry?
That's what you did, and that's what your summary says, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. But I did not meet Mr. Mobley in person. That was a poorly written summary, I'm sorry.
I'm surprised at that, Agent Gregory, because all your others are great.
I'm sorry.
Move to strike the comment.
That's fine, Judge, I agree.
I agree, it's true.
So you found nothing at the search warrant. You also on the 13th, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken, you contacted Lee Optical in Glen Place Mall to see if either Erik Sparre or his dad had glasses there. Would that be correct?
That's correct, sir.
And did they?
No, sir, the people there said that particular store was never prepared glasses for you.
On March 27th, you received a phone call from Donald Mobley, manager of Winn-Dixie, and you verified with him, or at least he told you, and you wrote a summary, that Sparre clocked in at 3:06 on the 11th in the afternoon and clocked out March 12th, 6:41 a.m. Co-workers said that he had been there all night, and you knew him at that point to be a stock clerk, a night stock clerk. That's a correct statement of what your summary says, is that not correct?
If I'm understanding you correct, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Mobley, or whoever I spoke to, stated that he worked from 3 in the afternoon till 6 the next morning.
Right. And because of all of that, you discounted Erik Sparre as a possible suspect in this case and did no further investigation of him. Is that correct?
I did not hear or understand your question, Mr. Johnson.
Because of this, the search warrant, the information you got from Mr. Mobley, you discounted Erik Sparre as a suspect in this case, and you did no further investigation of him.
No, sir, we did not discount him as a suspect. That's why the summaries pertaining to Mr. Sparre were left in the active case file. It's just that at that time, he was not our primary suspect in the case.
What evidence did you have that he was, other than the statement that he made, what other physical evidence did you have that he was in Glenn County on the night of March the 11th, 1985 at approximately 9 p.m. that evening? What evidence did you have? Any?
You mean pertaining to Mr. Sparre?
Yes, any?
We did not have any other evidence that particular night as to his work.
What evidence did you have in this particular case that you found at that time or later that Erik Sparre even knew Deacon Swain and Miss Thelma Swain? What evidence?
My answer to that, Mr. Johnson, would be hearsay. You would have to ask Deputy Kennedy that question.
Well, there was no physical evidence. No, you didn't hear evidence from any place other than the telephone call. Is that correct?
As far as I know, that I knew of, and there again, I was basing it on what I was told by Deputy Kennedy, was the wife's statement as to what he said, what he was wearing the night of the murder, and that's all I knew, Mr. Johnson.
Well, actually, it wasn't the night of the murder. It was from March the 9th through the 15th, wasn't it?
Was that a question, Mr. Johnson? I couldn't hear you.
I withdraw that. Now, in the statement that Mrs. Head, hang on just a minute. In Defense Exhibit number 9, which is the statement by Emily Head, or Emily Sparre, she indicated that he wore a dark maroon shirt when he left. Is that correct? That's what you put in your affidavit?
His report.
Yes, sir. From what I was told by Deputy Kennedy, that the ex-wife had told him he was wearing a dark shirt. Now, from one of the documents I've seen, it was dark maroon.
Right. And you know from the police, from the
I don't know
crime,
who put that statement up, I did not.
you know from the crime lab report that it was, the buttons indicate they came from a dark blue shirt. Is that correct?
Mr. Johnson, you're awfully hard to understand. If you're asking me if the crime lab said that the shirt was a dark shirt, blue shirt, navy, blue, that's what they found.
Thank you, sir. You tell me what you want to do. Your original assumptions in this case and your original investigation in this case focused on Donnie Barentine. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And as a result of that investigation, you also found out that Donnie Barentine was at work until 4:30 our time on March the 11th, 1985. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as you testified about Dennis Perry, on that date, March the 11th, 1985, it would have taken substantially longer than 4 hours to get to Waverly, Georgia from Marianna, Florida, based on the roads that were not built at that time that we have now, correct?
Object to the form. He's not offering any testimony.
Mr. Johnson, I think we're comparing apples and oranges. There was no interstate.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, Jack, he's only offered testimony about the length of time to drive from Atlanta, from the Jonesboro area to Waverly, not giving any testimony about how long it would take to drive from Marianna, Florida.
I think that's in the trial transcript
I think so, too.
of his testimony about the time it took from Marianna, Florida to Spring Bluff. I think.
You need to hear that.
No, I'm saying, I thought that was in the transcript.
It is in the transcript.
Okay,
We went
so-
into it.
Overruled, go ahead.
I misunderstood.
So do you remember how long it took, 4.5 hours at that time without the Interstate 10 and Interstate 95? Do you remember your testimony at trial about that?
I did not understand any of that, Mr. Johnson. Is you asking me about the roads and the trip from Marianna to Spring Bluff? Is that what you're asking?
Agent Gregory, did you ever check to see how long it took in 1985 on March the 11th to drive from Marianna, Florida to Waverly, Georgia?
Yes, sir, we did.
And that took how long?
I do not have those summaries in front of me, sir, but he could have made it from Marianna, even if he did clock out at that time. He could have made it from his place of work to the church in time to have been there at the time of the killing.
And you base that on what?
I'm sorry?
You base that on what? Did you drive it?
We drove it. We drove from the parking lot of where he was employed to the church, sir.
And what
On our
time
way
did
back
it,
from Marianna.
what time did it take?
I don't recall. You'll have to check the investigative summary, sir.
What evidence, physical evidence, did you have that Donnie Barentine was present in Camden County on the night of March the 11th, 1985?
Physical evidence?
Yes, sir. What physical evidence did you have?
Physical evidence? None.
What physical evidence, statements from other people who witnessed his relationship with Deacon Swain, what evidence did you have that he had a relationship with Deacon Swain?
What connection did Donnie Barentine have with Deacon Swain?
Yes. What connection?
The Barentines were drug dealers working for...
Wait a minute. Now, I'm asking you, What evidence did you
Judge,
have
he's trying to give
that
an
Donnie
answer to the question
Barrington?
he was asked.
I'd ask that he be responsive to the
I
question.
think he's answering your question.
He's answering it.
What evidence did you have that Donnie Barrington had a relationship with Deacon Swain?
Deacon Swain's adopted daughter had a stepfather, Mr. Brown, who was a member of the Black Mafia in Savannah, Georgia. The Barringtons also had dealings with the Black Mafia, and there was a big rift between the two. Brown had been arrested by federal agents, was being hid out. My belief,
I'm going to object, I'm going to
if I
object to your
may
belief.
give my opinion, Your Honor,
All right, you don't want to ask that question anymore?
No,
Your Honor, he asked him the question.
You don't want to hear the answer. I guess you're going to move on to something else. Okay, move on to something else.
not find Mr. Brown, so they went after family.
All right.
needless to say, all of this information was available at trial in 2003. As far as the GBI report was concerned, all of that information was there and made available to the defense. Is that
Object
correct?
to the form, Your Honor. The witness has already testified. He was retired by then. He has no idea what was in the GBI file at the time.
Actually, I believe
Mr.
he's
Perry's
also,
trial in 2003.
I believe he's also testified that the answer is yes.
Well, he testified, he turned,
That it was for.
everything that he produced, he put in the file.
He
That's his
did,
testimony.
and he said he should have been, but this is a different question. This is answering that it was, and he doesn't have any personal knowledge or way to know that.
Can you answer that question, Ms. Gregory?
Could not hear the question, Your Honor.
All right. You want to answer it, ask it, we're going to move on.
Agent Gregory, I do want to clear up the cleared box file. If you received information from, let's say, California on a suspect, and you did some initial checking on that and determined that person was not able to be a suspect in this case, you would have put that in a file called the cleared file, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you did that for everybody that you got information on, whether it came from outside sources, the unsolved mysteries, or otherwise. You did that on every one of them, didn't you?
Yes, sir. Everyone that we took the time that even a possibility that they were involved in the case, that information was placed in the cleared file once we did clear that suspect.
And you remember at trial, those 9 black 3-inch volumes were put on the jury box ledge while you were testifying. Do you remember that?
I could not understand you.
Do you remember at trial, those 9 volumes of cleared defendants was put on the jury box railing while you testified?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I can't understand you.
I'll just, he doesn't have to.
Something about it, the trial. That's as far
It's
as I can
okay, Judge.
understand.
Oh, so he's going to move on to another question.
It's okay, because that'll be in the record. That's all I have, Judge.
Can you read it, Harlan?
Yes, just a short one, Your Honor. Mr. Gregory, just so the record is clear, you were retired by 2003 when Mr. Perry went to trial, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you have no way of knowing what was in the GBI files at the time of the trial, do you?
there again, it's going to be hearsay. I had been given copies of the defense, what they received. That file was maybe an inch thick. When I retired, that file was 3 volumes. Somebody had reduced it to 1 volume. I have no idea who did that, who removed, decided what went in, stayed in, or went out.
And is that why, in responding to Mr. Johnson's question earlier, you said the file had been raffled?
Yes, sir.
So the record's clear. You never met with the person who identified himself to you on one or more phone calls as Donald Mobley. Is that correct?
No, sir. It's all telephone conversation.
That's all I have, Mr. Gregory. Thank you very much for your patience.
Well, 1 second, Mr. Gregory, hold on.
Agent Gregory, did you ever go to Jacksonville and to Winn-Dixie headquarters and get the actual time card on Erik Sparre? Since he was a suspect still,
No.
did you do that?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay, that's all I have to.
Anything else?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. You are excused. You have a good day.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry I couldn't hear it all that well.
Well, that's the problem's on our end. All right, y'all will take about a 15-minute recess.
Please.
Is the next witness by video conference?
The next witness will be live.
Okay, very good. All right, still 15 minutes.